my water.
Okay.
Is yours?
Let me, yeah, so
Mine's
you're...
on the right.
Yep, sounds good.
How long is this again?
Like 15.
15?
Yeah.
Okay. Mine's a little less than 15. And then like
Is
about
it okay
10
if you, could you grab this so I can use this for my papers?
Oh yeah. Well, actually, you know what I'll do? Just... Is that fine?
Yep.
Anna's taking payments.
I have all that information. Yeah. Dad is also?
I think it's taking cash.
Okay.
And then food.
Okay. Yep. All right. Good evening. My name is Elisa Neff. I am a professor of great books here at Belmont Abbey College, and perhaps of greater relevance to you today, the sister of Father Jonathan Torres, on whose behalf we are all joined here today. Your lives are busy, and choosing to spend a Monday evening away from your homes comes with even the smallest bit of sacrifice. We are grateful for that sacrifice and blessed by your support. Before allowing Father Torres to speak to you all this evening, he asked that I offer a brief reflection in defense of literature. In his humility, he did not ask me to touch upon the specifics of his novel, probably because he thought I wouldn't finish it in time. But in the spirit of poetry, I could not speak to the nature of literature without touching upon particulars. And so I would like to begin with a consideration of the purpose of our being here today. There are many elements which give rise to the making of a great work of art. A person's life, experience, education, hopes, and sorrows. And as is on display this evening, the impression of his dearest friends and family. All such elements contribute to the power of the poet's imagination, and in our case today, have given life to the daunting, tedious, and Herculean task taken up by Father Torres over 10 years ago, namely the writing of Blinding Dawn, the first of 3 installments of his trilogy, The Scattered Worlds of Treunda. The sheer amount of hours which Father Torres has dedicated to this project, the staggering level of detail, intricacy of world building, and the agony experienced in penning over a dozen revisions, all this is in itself stunning and admirable. But even greater than the arduous commitment to the craft of writing, Blinding Dawn reveals the soul of a poet in tune with the muses, nourished by both the philosophical and religious wisdom of the West, filled with a sense of adventure and hope, eager to invite his readers to drink from that same spring which has given him life, meaning, and redemption. In the words of Joseph Pierce on the reading of Blinding Dawn, quote, "3 elements are necessary for any author wishing to forge a good fantasy novel. The first is his ability to write well. The second is the gift of mythopoeia, the gift of storytelling. The third is the goodness, truth, and beauty of the spirit that animates the telling of the story." Father Jonathan D. Torres is gifted with all 3 elements to a remarkable degree. The result is a work of elven enchantment that is as edifying as it is engaging, end quote. This second element of forging a good fantasy that Pierce notes, mythopoeia, is of particular importance. It is the gift of storytelling, poetry, poiesis, which in the Greek simply means making. The first word of Blinding Dawn is man-made. This happens also to be the only word in the entire novel which I read. I kid. I did, in fact, read the novel in its entirety, which I will tell you is much easier and more fun than you might expect given its great length. Now back to this first word, man-made, the first word of the novel. To engage in the art of making, what Tolkien has called sub-creation, is to participate in the creative diffusion of the logos. But as we learn of the many technologies made in the world of Versha, one of the 3 worlds of Treunda, this power to make can easily become the power to destroy, manipulate, distort, and even lie. Blinding Dawn shows in an undogmatic manner the great potential that man possesses as poet, maker, as a participant in the grand narrative of our lives, which is itself a story. As we hear in the exchange between Clavin and Arvo in the world of Pelennor, quote, "Life is not like a story, it is a story. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have anything to hope for. We wouldn't yearn for the evil in our world to be vanquished. For without a narrative, good and evil are just chance events. As members of the hooded Valkyr, we are living in our own story now. And if we live and die well, we may be remembered in the legends of another storyteller," end quote. This meta-reflection on story within the story of Blinding Dawn behooves its genre. As Tolkien once described himself, Father Torres is known to have an epic temperament, and his novel reveals this inclination in him. it is epic that lends itself to a reflection upon the individual in relation to history more than any other genre. Epic, according to the late Louise Cowan of the University of Dallas, quote, brings to consciousness the entire myth of a culture. The epic cosmos in itself implies a force, an energy that impels a people forward. Though such a movement is portrayed through the actions of one person, it affects the life of all, expressing an elemental will within a people, unrecognized among them without the hero's urgency. His pressing outward against the forces pressing inward, a violence from within that protects us from a violence from without, end quote. Through the parallel journey of the three protagonists of Blinding Dawn, Father Torres invites us to consider the way in which the hero's quest can take on a variety of forms, yet still map onto universal patterns of sacrifice, adventure, transcendence, and self-discovery. In the world of Versha, Yavin must learn to question the seemingly infallible truths of his world's technological prowess. He must learn to relinquish what is most dear to him, knowing that what is most dear to him will be lost if he gives way to fear and despair. Shifting to the world of Palnor, Arvo, a master archer, stands as a moving and breathing image to the opening of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where we read, "The good is that at which all things aim." We enter the world of Palnor devoted to a blind legalism with images of archery. The inhabitants of Palnor aim but ultimately skirt the good, and Arvo must ultimately discern where the bullseye of justice lies. Lastly, Ixos of the world of Erosia enters a quest of a more contemplative nature. His journey, while also geographical, is primarily intellectual. The beauty of his world is felt on every page of Father Torres' writing, and yet it is not enough for Ixos. Beauty without truth devolves into cheap entertainment, and at best, intellectual hedonism, the comfortable and pleasurable self-satisfaction of the artist who has lost his way, forgotten the meaning and end of his own craft. We do not encounter our heroes at the time of their birth, nor do we encounter the worlds they inhabit at the beginning of their stories. Like the epics of our tradition, we enter the world of Treunda in media res, which is to say we are caught up in the middle of things, entering upon a story that has already begun and will continue even after the end of this particular tale. To venture upon something not of our own making, something that comes to us, is the true meaning of adventure. It is the quest of the truly responsible man, the man who is able to respond, who has a response ability. What is this ability? How can I recognize this universal call to adventure when it particularizes itself in my own life? It is story, literature, poetry, poiesis, the making art that propels us toward the answer to such questions. In a recently published article, Liturgy as Gateway to Kleos, author Mandy Girth observes this spiritual force of literature. Quote, "When we ask students to participate in liturgies that include the memorization of poetry, the reading of great literature, we are asking them to transcend time, to journey with us into timelessness, a place where life is glorious, deeds are noble, and change is possible, where heroes and great events reside. In that place, we are able to imagine what we might be called upon to do, and we can put on the virtue of others who have done it before us, end quote. That the reading of stories requires a defense today speaks to the poverty of our times, of a society distracted from distractions by distractions, as T.S. Eliot once wrote. And for a writer to have the epic temperament, as Tolkien once said of himself, is a curse in an overcrowded age devoted to snappy bits. But I hope that by the end of this evening, you will feel less satisfied with the snappy bits and immediate gratification of contemporary entertainment. While the satisfaction born from reading a good story may feel slow and tedious to obtain, its impression upon the soul is more lasting. More is required of the reader than of the passive observer. The imagination is exercised, and we are compelled to enter into a cosmos where the moral demands placed upon the hero become for us both existential and eschatological, which is to say, in literature that is truly great, we are invited to reflect upon our own existence in light of the end of all things. In his work, Why Literature Matters, the former president of Wyoming Catholic College, Dr. Glenn Arbery, draws this relevant and important distinction. Quote, "The word literature is a measure of the works of the poetic or making imagination, and it implies a distinction between mere entertainment and a deeply pleasurable mode of wisdom. Literature does not mean what is unpopular or incomprehensible, but what has in it the capacity to illuminate and surprise, teach and delight in a lasting way. Literature matters because nothing can better approach the form in this sense of life, in its felt reality, as it is most deeply experienced, with an intelligence that increases in power the more it explores the most unbearable dimensions of joy and suffering. Without being specifically religious in itself, it can give an experience of common glory that initiates something otherwise unsayable about the nature of the Word, the Logos, through whom all things were made. It can turn even the loss of life and meaning not only to the rediscovery of meaning, but into an occasion of promissory joy," end quote. Through the journey of his heroes, Father Torres poetically demonstrates man's need for stories and illuminates the catastrophic consequences of a world that has not only forgotten its history, but has failed to look up to the stars at all, of a people who have settled for cold facts, unexamined laws, and cheap entertainment. We need stories. We need stories to pull us out from the narrow confines of our own comfortable logic, to wake us up from the malaise and brute repetition of our modern sensibilities, which make us fearful of life's most important questions, questions of good and evil and life and death. We need stories to remind us that the suffering we are now experiencing, many others have endured, and that while life will go on without us, we have a part to play in the manner of its future direction. In the words of John Henry Newman, literature is the autobiography of man. Your presence here today matters. It shows a willingness to step outside, even for a moment, a culture of easy, passive entertainment. If you feel so inspired to pick up and read the work in praise this evening, you will have given yourself over to the lasting pleasures of poetic enjoyment, and in so doing, taste the sweetness of poetic wisdom. It is now with great joy that I introduce to you this evening the author of Blinding Dawn, The Scattered Worlds of Treunda. Father Jonathan Torres received his Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Belmont Abbey College in 2013. In 2016, he received his bachelor's in philosophy from the Pontifical College Josephinum and his master's in divinity, also from the Josephinum, in May 2020. He was ordained to the priesthood for the Diocese of Charlotte in July 2020 and currently serves as a Roman Catholic priest in the western half of North Carolina. Please join me both in welcoming and congratulating Father Jonathan Torres.
Thank you, Elisa. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a few people who have helped me bring my story to fruition. To the late Dr. Robert Preston, who first provoked me into the realm of wonder through his class, Ancient and Medieval Philosophy. To my seminary formator, Father Joseph Murphy, who instilled in me a desire to know, which helped me cultivate a habit of wonder. To my classmates from Belmont Abbey College, who read a very early draft of this story, Craig Tafaro, Brother Leo Young, and Sharon Cable. To Christopher Hamilton, with whom I spent many late nights talking about the nature of truth, goodness, and beauty. To Father Timothy Reed, who introduced me to Catholic literature and first pointed out my vocation to the priesthood when I was a teenager. To David Liberto, who provided excellent feedback on one of my drafts and also supported me along the road to publication. To Orrin Eads and Jessica Barnes, who both provided illuminating critical feedback. To the excellent team at Chrism Press, especially my editors, Dr. William Gonch and Karen Yulo, who both saw the potential in this story. And lastly, to my family, especially my siblings Matthew and Elisa, with whom I've shared countless inspiring conversations. And of course, my father and mother, John and Lucy, who first planted in me the seed of my Catholic faith and spent their lives helping it grow. May Christ keep truth in our minds, beauty before our eyes, and goodness in the work of our hands. Additionally, I want to thank Belmont Abbey for hosting this event tonight. Ever since 2011, the Abbey has been a home away from home and has been crucial in my journey of faith. I'd like to begin now with a passage from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, specifically chapter 2, verses 6 through 11. And some scripture scholars call this passage the Christ poem, in which Paul's concept of Christ is clearly outlined. And I quote, "Though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not regard equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness. And found human in appearance, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Because of this, God greatly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bend, of those in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." This passage not only outlines St. Paul's concept of Christ, but it also provides us with the perfect pattern for every hero in every story worth telling. Essentially, this passage provides us with the pattern of the hero's journey. While I won't go into too much detail about this passage tonight, what I will say is that Paul depicts Christ leaving a place of safety, being in the form of God, and descending into the realm of the unknown, where he faces death, even death on a cross. At the cross, our Lord defeats evil and then is greatly exalted and is recognized by everyone as the hero king. Now, while Christ is the archetype of every noble hero, I personally did not recognize his face in all the stories I grew up with until I was in my mid-20s. Since I was a child, I have always been deeply moved by stories, whether in books or movies, even in video games, or simply getting lost with my toys, creating fantastical narratives. My heart has always been inspired by the concepts of good versus evil, of epic journeys, and of magnificent displays of virtue in the face of suffering and death. When I came to Belmont Abbey in 2011, I discovered that my love of stories could not only be reconciled with my faith, but in fact was the very foundation by which my faith could thrive. I remember first reading Dante and feeling as though scales had fallen from my eyes. I thought, at last, my faith is not simply good and true, but also beautiful. My faith is not simply a set of rules by which I should adhere to, but rather an epic journey to be experienced. And though I did not know it at first, it was Christ who was behind every story I loved. He was the hero I was attracted to. He was the one whom all other heroes participate in. At some level, every good story tries to say something about human nature. And because Christ has fulfilled human nature, that means every good story finds its fulfillment in him. My love of stories and my recognition of Christ as the archetypal hero not only renewed my love for the Catholic faith, but also drew me to the priesthood as well. Long before I discovered my vocation to the priesthood, I wanted to be a writer, a novelist. In the end, I see these two pathways, that of the priesthood and that of a writer, as being wonderfully similar. Now, on the face of it, the vocation of a priest may seem to be at odds with the vocation of a writer. One way to mischaracterize the vocation of a priest is to believe that he is a man who is detached from the natural world, that he cares only for spiritual things and despises that which is material. However, nothing could be further from the truth. A priest should not spurn the natural world, but rather love it dearly. He should not suppress it, but rather raise it up to the sacred. Take, for example, the sacramental life of a church. At Mass, the priest takes ordinary bread and wine, that is, material elements, and offers it to God, so it may become the body and blood of Christ. Now consider a writer, or more generally, an artist. Some may mischaracterize him as one who is inordinately attached to the natural world and exists purely on a physical plane. Mere words are his tools and nothing more. Yet to make this claim would be to grossly underestimate his vocation. An artist, like a priest, uses natural means, in this case, paper and pen, to encapsulate something supernatural, something that does not have a body. Ultimately, a priest and a writer participate in the very mission of Christ himself. He who is the Word, that is, the enfleshed idea of God, the supernatural made natural, has elevated us to the transcendent through the natural world, which is what all priests and writers are called to do. By the incarnation, the physical and the spiritual have been bridged, and nature has been elevated to the divine. As Tolkien once said in his essay on fairy stories, by the making of Pegasus, horses were ennobled. In the trees of the sun and moon, root and stock, flower and fruit are manifested in glory. Likewise, by the Word becoming flesh, all of the world and the things in it have been made sacred. In the end, it was the power of the Word that has provoked me into the life that I live now, both as a priest and a writer. My story, The Scattered Worlds of Treunda, is but a drop in the ocean of all the stories that have inspired me. So, speaking of my story, I want to provide a little background as to how it came to fruition. I first conceived of an idea for a fantasy series while taking my first class here at the Abbey with the late Dr. Robert Preston. It was a philosophy class, ancient and medieval philosophy, which introduced me to the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. So I began to think, what if there was a world where each culture was characterized by each of the transcendentals? There would be a realm that was characterized by truth, another realm by goodness, and another realm by beauty. However, what fundamentally marks the transcendentals is unity. All three are convertible with each other. So whatever is good is true and beautiful. Whatever is beautiful is good and true. and whatever is true is beautiful and good. Thus, to really highlight the distinction between the three different cultures in my book, the cultures would have to be divided. The unity had to be shattered. Thus, my story begins with the three cultures showcasing an inversion of the transcendentals. The world that should represent truth, called Versha, is characterized by rationalism, where science and technology have become gods, and there's no room for spirituality. The world that represents goodness, called Palnor, is characterized by legalism, where a desire for a perfect world means adhering to the law to the point of removing human empathy. And lastly, the world that represents beauty, called Erosia, is characterized by an unhealthy aestheticism, where twisted desire and pleasure take the place of a correctly ordered desire for things that are spiritual. My story explores what it means to live in a scattered world, a world of division, and the immense suffering it takes to restore unity in such a world. Now, any good story has to move beyond the realm of the conceptual. A novel is not the same as a philosophical treatise. And that's where my fantastic publisher at Chrism Press came into play, plus the great critical feedback I received from my alpha and beta readers. Through many years of work that included writing over 10 drafts, along with the help of those who I mentioned earlier, in addition to pushing through many rejection letters from publishers and literary agents, I believe I have not only retained the concept that led me to writing this story, but most importantly, I've begun to tell a story that is enjoyable, edifying, and hopefully able to point my readers to the one who is true, good, and beautiful himself, Jesus Christ our Lord. To him be glory now and forevermore. Amen. At this time, I'd like to read an excerpt from my novel. This passage I've chosen comes from chapter 6, entitled Visitations. It takes place in the realm of Erosia, which is again the realm that was inspired by the transcendental of beauty. It hints at the struggle of the main protagonist in Erosia, namely his conflicting desires of wanting to marry a beautiful girl in his village and his desire to embark on an adventure that will take him far away from home. So I'll begin. I don't have it memorized. I had the book here, so don't worry. This is only going to be about an hour and a half, so just bear with me. Okay. So again, this is from chapter 6. Sitting at the kitchen table, Ixus gulped down his Navarro juice and wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his tunic. He picked up his little leather book, The Two Ways, and opened it to the first page. There are two paths a man can take, he read. He bit his bottom lip and flipped forward a few chapters. Marthana approached from her room. Good morning, son. You're back early. Elder Kadan didn't need me today. He kept his eyes fixed on his book. He wanted to give the new acolytes an opportunity to serve. Marthana grabbed a loaf of rosemary bread and cut off 2 pieces. Was Ayeni serving as a handmaid? She was. He lowered his gaze, imagining Ayeni walking home with Rylos. He swallowed hard and refocused on his book. The kettle over the fire whistled. Marthana poured herself some tea. She drizzled spiced olive oil on her bread, grabbed a ripe Navarro from the fruit basket, and brought her breakfast to the table. Are you starting your elder studies already? Ixus chuckled. No, although most novices have this book memorized by the time they are anointed. Marthana sipped her tea. I had a dream last night of when I was a child, said Ixus. I used to help you plant sunflower seeds in the backyard. His mother smiled. You ate more than I planted. I did. And I remembered what you told me in my dream. You said if I wanted to see sunflowers in our yard one day, I had to stop eating the seeds. I think I had that dream last night because I read something that echoed your words. He thumbed through a few pages and found the chapter he was looking for, on sacrifice. The first line read, to sacrifice is to live in hope. Sacrifice is tied to the future. Marthana cocked her head to the side. The future. To sacrifice means we suffer something now, in the present, so we can gain something in the future. The future is unknown and mysterious, yet when we sacrifice, we act like we are sure of it. The future, that is. Isn't that interesting? Very. She peeled the red and yellow rind off her Navarro. Ixus caught the citrusy aroma of the fresh fruit. He turned 2 pages. I've been thinking of sacrifices a lot lately, ever since Dad's 3-year anniversary last month. His mother stopped peeling and stared at the table. I've been trying to understand how our willing sacrifices help us cope with tragedy. Marthana broke the fruit in 2, sighing. Have you thought of an answer? I think so. Sacrifices express the disposition of our souls. They are signs of detachment and resignation to the will of Eminar. The greater our sacrifices, the more docile we will be when tragedy strikes. That's a good answer. If the order allows it, you'll make a great elder one day. Ixus's heart swelled with the prospect. He imagined himself officiating sacrifices on behalf of his loved ones, especially Naval, who was now working in Arum as a scholar. He imagined Ayeni serving alongside him. He wondered how many elders in Erosia were married. Among those, how many officiated sacrifices with their spouses serving in the temple? Probably none. Yet it could happen under the disciplines of the order. Marthana swallowed a piece of Navarro. When you are done untangling all of Erosia's philosophical questions, can you go to the lake and bring up some Ima? I used the last of it yesterday. I'll go now. He rose, slipped on his sandals, and hurried out the front door. The scent of springtime permeated the air. Swallows chirped overhead and zigzagged across the sky. With a little effort, he lifted 2 ceramic jars into his wooden cart, then pulled it down the road to the shore. The jars shook and rattled. He passed one white, flat-roofed house after another. Handmade ornaments hung from the open doorways. Candles stood atop adobe windowsills. A few neighbors were outside, cleaning their yards and tending their gardens. The road sloped downward, turning into a series of bends. Ixus pressed his feet into the ground to slow his pace. The jars kept rattling. About a dozen men and women walked along, talking, laughing, arguing, or simply minding their own business. When he reached the shore, he sat in the thick grass. Minutes slipped away as he became hypnotized by the lake. It sparkled like a crystal. Thin strands of light along the shoreline pointed up to the firmament, which contained a subtle hint of tiny twinkling stars in its azure hue. He got up and knelt over the Ama, submerged his mother's jars one at a time, and pulled them out when they were full. As he placed them back in his cart, he heard someone call his name. Ixus. The voice made his heart rise with delight. Ayeni descended the small hill on which her family's house stood. Through one of the windows, her siblings watched Ixus with their hands over their mouths. He could hear their giggles as their mother appeared and shooed them away. Ayeni looked at the jars and smiled. My sister Syra bet 1 copper that you'd spill the Ima before getting it into the cart. I'm glad my strength made you richer. How was the temple? It was fine. She sat in the grass and placed her bare feet in the lake. I'm sorry you couldn't walk me home. Ixus sat next to her. She pushed a few wandering strands of hair behind her ear. I can't believe Naval already left for our room. Ixus took a pinch of grass and tossed it into the lake. It's only been a week, but it feels like a year. For a moment, they said nothing. Ayeni kicked her feet, causing the Ima to slosh and sparkle. Ixus faced her and opened his mouth to speak, but stopped when he noticed a glimmer in her dark eyes. Their brilliance made him forget what he was going to say. He turned back to the Ima, his heart sick. Ayeni pulled a red-petaled wildflower from the grass. For you. It was an arecinth. Ixus took it, realizing the implications of the gift. Arecinths were famous for their ability to last years before showing any signs of withering. Thus, they symbolized eternity and beauty's endurance in the face of death. Yet that wasn't what Ixus thought of when he held the flower. Its 3 distinct petals also symbolized a man, a woman, and the love that they shared. Surely, the implications were not lost on Ayeni. Ayeni called a high-pitched voice from her house. Come inside. Lunch is almost ready. The two friends rose. "You and your mother should come over for dinner," said Ayeni. "My mother is baking a ham that's too big for our family. I'm sure she won't mind. If she does, I'll come by and tell you." "Absolutely, we'll come over." Ayeni laughed, and Ixis realized he sounded too enthusiastic. He blushed as Ayeni gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. "Your sisters are going to tease you all week." She smiled. "Come before nightfall." Then she walked back to her house. "We will," he called after her. He watched until she entered her home. With a satisfied sigh, he placed his aerosint in a fold of his tunic. He then grabbed his cart full of Ima and traveled the road home. With every step, he realized more clearly what had happened. He had just been kissed by the most beautiful girl in his hamlet. She had given him an aerosint, the Erosean symbol of love. Now he was going to have dinner with her family. He felt like the wealthiest, most richly blessed person in the world. As he crested the top of the hill, Ixis woke from his daydreaming. A large white horse stood tied to the fence of his front yard. He tightened his grip on the handles of his cart and hurried home to inspect the animal. It wore a luxurious blue saddle trimmed with gold. Elder Kadan. Ixis stood in the doorway and heard voices, faint yet clear. A sniffle came from the kitchen. His mother was crying. He strained his ears to listen. "I understand," his mother said in a cracked voice. "It is your choice first," said Kadan. "I will not approach him if I do not have your permission." Ixis couldn't hear the response. In the heavy silence, his heart throbbed hard. They're talking about me. What could the elder have said that would bring Ixis' mother to tears? "Your sacrifice will bear much fruit in the world," said Kadan. "He's gifted. I am confident he will help open the eyes of many. May Eminar pour his blessings upon you." Ixis heard a chair scrape as Kadan rose from the table and moved toward the door with slow, heavy footsteps. Taking a deep breath, Ixis stepped forward to meet the elder. Kadan stopped short as his eyes went wide, then softened. "Ixis, let's go for a walk." Kadan grabbed his staff, which leaned against the entryway of the house. They walked north to avoid the prying ears of Lady Philigath, the town gossip to the south. I'll end there to find out the conversation by the book. So at that point, I think I'll hand it back to Elisa. Yeah, so thank you.
All right, don't get too comfortable, Father Torres. We have a few minutes for some questions. And Father Torres, if you don't mind repeating the question for those who are watching online. So, does anyone have a question for Father Torres? I'll get us started then, because I have a lot of questions. Oh, thank God. Okay. Yes, Connor.
When did you write? Morning, nights, at red lights, or when did you write?
The answer is at any time I could. There would be some nights where I was struck with inspiration and woke up and penned something down by my nightstand. There's other times where, as seminary, actually, I wrote a lot. In seminary, you have a very structured schedule. And so you just say, okay, this is the time I can write for the next week every day at this specific block, whenever I could find time. It's something that you have to really, as a writer, if you really want to write, you have to sacrifice some things that you want to do and write. And so whenever I can find time. And the thing for me is that I really enjoyed it. It was a labor of love, and there was a lot of work involved, but I loved it. I love to write, so yeah. Now with book 2 on the horizon, my publisher wants it on August 1st is the deadline. And so it's taken me 10 years to write this book. It'll take me a few months to write that book. So pray for me. Yeah. Any other questions?
What is the religion in the book? And you mentioned the temple.
Yeah. So the question was, what is the religion? And so it's a fantasy book, so it's not a religion that we can find on Earth. The religion that is found in my world is found most prominently in the world of Erosia. The other cultures have but forgotten religion. And so, though they don't know it, they worship other gods. The world of Palnor, they kind of worship the code of law. They're very legalistic, and so law is their god. The world of Versha, they're very scientifically driven, technologically driven. They won't admit it, but that is their god. The world of Erisea is the only one that still holds on to a semblance of spirituality. And you find in that world rituals like animal sacrifices and morning prayers that some of these characters will participate in. So, any other questions?
So you talked about the influence of philosophy, I think in one of the first concepts of your book. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your time at Belmont studying English, maybe more particularly what Dante taught you that maybe brought it to some of those concepts?
Yeah, so philosophy, studying philosophy here at the Abbey really sparked my mind in a way that I've never experienced before in terms of my faith. I was so surprised to find all these natural reasons for belief. Reading literature was a step forward for me. It was essentially all those philosophical concepts that I loved enveloped in a story. That's essentially what good literature is. It's distilled truth, where you find these ideas in philosophy wrapped up in a narrative. Which is even more attractive, right? This is what Sir Philip Sidney would say, is that reading poetry and literature is like the sugar-coated pill, right? Sugar-coated medicine, where it's delightful to taste, but it's actually healing for the body. And then Dante specifically opened my mind up to this idea of beauty. It was, again, as I mentioned in my talk briefly, I'd never experienced a faith presented in a beautiful way. Growing up, mom and dad, you did a great job, by the way. But it was like, we go to church on Sundays. This is the catechism. This is how you act, and that's all well and good. But for me, it became real when it was attractive, and desire was awoken. The thing that I would say that Dante really showcases is that desire is not something to be suppressed, but rather purified, right? And that's what I think struck a chord with me. And I think, ultimately that idea of beauty, the idea of desire, is what, that's like literature at its best. When you can find these truths that can be wrote if we're not careful in presenting them, to be, again, enveloped in that beautiful kind of narrative way. So I think there was one question back here, and then we're getting a few more hands over here. So, yes. I have actually 3 questions. Okay. I sent out 40 emails to literary agents and publishers. I heard back from a handful of those saying no, and then it was radio silence for most of those too. And so now, I took comfort in knowing that most authors do get rejected. That's the industry. It's these slush piles that the publishers have to go through. My manuscript is one out of maybe 24 that they might have on their desk. And if they're not immediately pulled in by the first sentence or the first page, they move on. And so, no offense taken, for me, but it was something that still hurts your pride a little bit. You're putting your art out there and you don't hear anything, and so you just have to push through that. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I remember the first time I pitched my novel was actually to a pretty well-known literary agent in New York. He's actually Andrew Klavan's literary agent. And I actually heard back from him within an hour, and he said he was very interested in the idea, and he asked for my manuscript immediately. And I was like, this is a piece of cake. Wow. This is awesome. And he, after a week, he's like, thank you, this is not for me. That's it. And then I went through the long, arduous journey of more emails and more rejections. There was a lot of times where I was tempted to give up. And, I'd be lying if I said all those years that I wrote, 11 years, was like every single day I was writing and working. There was times where it was like, months at a time where I was just like, I don't know if I can finish this. I don't know if this is worth it. But then something in me just wanted to pick it up again, and it was a story I believed in. It's a story I really wanted to tell. So, yeah. Yeah, it was just that sense that I had a story in me, and I really wanted to see it. You know, even if this was, buy the book, please, but even if you don't, the fact that I'm holding this in my hand, for me, that's worth more than gold for me. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple more questions, I think, here. Yes, Father. Yeah, a couple of early drafts, it was way too conceptual, and it did read like a philosophical treatise. And you know, people, I got a lot of feedback saying like, listen, this is just boring. It's just boring. And I really wanted to hold on to that concept. And I was wondering like, could this concept actually be a story that's worth reading and that would actually pull people through, you know, in my case, 300 pages. And so there was a lot of doubt where I was like, maybe I should just trash this idea, keep the characters and, you know, do something different. But like I said, my publisher, Chrism Press, they're a small Catholic publishing company, but they're really professional, really great. And they were able to hold on to my concept. And they said they love the concept, they love the idea, but they really helped me develop a story that's worth reading. You know, a story is, again, not a treatise. It's, you know, essentially it's a character wants something, and there's an obstacle to get that thing. That's essentially what a story is. And so every scene has to kind of showcase what the character wants and why he's not able to get it. And that's what moves it forward. So, yeah. Yes, Dr. Monroe. Yeah, that's a good question. So essentially, how did I come up with the characters within the world themselves? Some of them are honestly little reflections of me. There's actually a couple of characters that are based off of real-life people. I have one teacher, Ixis, who we heard in the excerpt that I read. He has a teacher who is very quirky, and I based him off of one of my formators in seminary. He does very odd things. And so, yeah, I think it depends. You know, an artist needs to be able to pull from a variety of sources, right? And so, whether it's other people that I know, whether it's characters that I grew up, you know, looking up to, written by other authors, you know, within my own heart, my own desires and weaknesses, those are all the sources that I pulled from. So, yeah. Yes, James. That's a good question. Is there anything that I learned from the characters in my book? You know, writing good characters, I'm not saying that I did, but I know, you know, what it takes, I think, conceptually, what it takes to write a good character. Characters have to have a certain sense of freedom. And so while I want characters to embark on this, you know, on their own journeys and have these arcs, their choices need to feel natural. And sometimes, as I'm writing, I'm like, well, if I force my character into this plot, that's not natural, and they wouldn't choose that freely, right? And so then I have to rethink, like, what would this character do freely, you know, based off of everything we know? And that kind of takes a life on of its own, right? And they actually start to make choices that are beyond even my control. What I would say in terms of learning from my characters, it's weird that there's times where I've been inspired by just rereading some of my drafts. You know, there's times where maybe I've, you know, the priesthood is a difficult, you know, vocation. There's times where I go back and read, like, wow, you know, that's right, my character did overcome this obstacle, you know? And that's what, like, great stories, you know, they do that. They inspire us to be better, you know, they inspire us to reach towards the good, you know, despite the evil in front of us. And so, because these characters have been living and breathing inside my heart and mind, I'm very close to them. And so seeing how they're overcoming these obstacles is, yeah, inspiring in some level to me, so, yeah. Yes, Father Chinanza. So one negative about being published by a traditional publisher is that they choose the title, right? But they were very collaborative, and they worked really well with me. And so we went back and forth a lot between different titles. The idea behind Blinding Dawn, which I do love, and it's a title that really works. The more I thought about it and prayed about it, that was the title that they presented to me. It's this idea that these characters are seeing the world as it should be, and there's a sense of light. Blinding, that word should evoke a sense of harshness. And so while these characters are coming to realize the world as it should be, some of the characters are not really open to that light. Light is a good thing to help us see, but if we're not, if we live in the shadows, it's going to be harsh and painful. And that's what some of the antagonists experience, is that, these cultures are moving in a direction where, cosmically, the worlds are coming together. And there's a lot of people that don't want that. And so it becomes blinding in that sense. And the dawn, again, this represents the beginning. The first book out of 3. So one more question, I think. Yes, Jeff. Well, knowing what I know now, I've only written 1 book, so I still have a lot to learn. I would just say persevere. If this is something that you really love and believe in, do it. And, I think, I remember, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, I was pregnant with book and how I longed to give birth, right? And that's the mark of a good writer, a good artist, is that he has something in him that he needs to get out into the world. And that's what I feel like, it was for me, is that, again, maybe, even if I didn't publish this through a traditional publisher, I think it would have come out some way. And it was really just all those things that inspired me in my childhood. I just wanted to tell a story of my own. Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we're done with questions for now. But, yeah. And then I think Elisa's going to say one more thing, and then we're done. Yeah.
Comparing the publishing of this book to giving birth is dangerous territory for your sister here, who happened to have gone through that 6 weeks ago. But anyhow, I'll forgive you. Okay, so thank you again for joining us this evening. Before you all enjoy the charcuterie in the back and one another's company, I would like to announce the winner of our free book. So if you will pull out your tickets, which you should have received upon coming to the Haid. All right. I'm going to read the number here. So, are we ready? 2099615. Anyone? All right. Great. I think we have your book in the back. And for everyone else who did not win a free book, my sister Anna will be collecting payments by card. I believe my dad by cash. And otherwise, thank you again so much for coming here today. We're very blessed by your support. God bless.